Again.
Perhaps you can expand for us, since you have visited Libya, what is indeed the support that Muammar Gaddafi has, and what indeed is what is going on in terms of the tribal allegiance that exists there? Because as we understand, there has been these split along traditional tribal lines where animosity has existed, and also we, based on some research done, believe that this has indeed been funded by the West.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, thanks for asking. I mean, just on Friday, there was a complete blackout in the media, except for, I think, one CNN report. There was a march of 1 million Libyans in a country of 6 million people in Tripoli towards Green Square in support of the government and also in support of the people of Benghazi and Misrata, who are being harassed and persecuted by what I call counter-revolutionaries, what others call rebels, in particular black Libyans who, because of the really shameful story that Al Jazeera has pumped out about Gaddafi hiring African mercenaries, a racist assertion in itself, black Libyans in places like Misrata and Benghazi, I've met refugees from these areas who are victims of these atrocities. Black Libyans are being lynched publicly, and the most unspeakable atrocities are being committed against them. My close colleague Sukan Chandan says, is lynching black people back in fashion? It would seem so at the hands of these pro-NATO counter-revolutionaries. In terms of the tribes in Libya, from my sources, I have information that 90% of the tribes in Libya are supportive of the government, including the largest tribe in Libya. Of course, you know, before the uprising, there was frustrations within Libya, as there is in every single country, but the Libyan people are an extremely non-confrontational people that will go to the ends of the earth to resolve things in a non-confrontational way as brothers. And that is also reflected in the government, in the way in which the government has tried over the decades, has bent backwards to accommodate opposition forces in the government, which in a sense has backfired, as we saw by the people who defected from the government and who sold out because they were in the pockets of the CIA and MI6 and the other Western intelligence services.
Right.
So really, from my experience in Libya, the support for the government is absolutely widespread. And in contrast to Zan Rice, the Guardian journalist who thankfully was deported from Libya, I think on Friday or Saturday, I think that's correct, who was reporting that the reason why there is no opposition in Tripoli is because there are informers everywhere. 1 million people marched in the streets of Tripoli. YouTube it. You know, the people have spoken for themselves, really. Right.
Let me turn to Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof, let's look at some statements made by Robert Gates that I find interesting. First of all, in terms of NATO's budget, he came out on one very well-respected in the Western world media outlet and said the United States supports 25% of NATO's budget. Just 2 weeks ago, he said that the United States supports 75% of NATO's budget. And I'm talking about, well, what is the contribution of the other NATO members? And then, in a recent interview, he talked about the Libya war. The way I like to put it is, from our standpoint at the Pentagon, we're involved in a, quote, limited kinetic operation. Can you expand on these statements by Robert Gates, especially the last one, which I'd like your input on, limited kinetic operation? What does that mean?
Well, a limited kinetic operation means that we're only providing a supportive role. The United States is supplying a supportive role, but it's highly kinetic in that we're using high explosives. We're using tomahawks. We're using we're providing a lot of armament supplies to the other NATO countries, who are particularly Britain and France, who are quickly running out of ordnance to continue their bombing activities. I think Gates is quite concerned about the future of NATO. But and the NATO is really in a position to wondering what its future role is going to be. Even the Germans have not participated in this effort with Libya because they don't find it to be to their national interests. And there has been some trade-off behind the scenes to get more German assistance in Afghanistan. But
so these countries are beginning to weigh very heavily. What is it in their national interest? Why does Anders Fogh Rasmussen boast about NATO as it does when he says NATO is more needed and wanted than ever, from Afghanistan to Kosovo, from the coast of Somalia to Libya? We are busier than ever before. When we find that only 7 to 8 countries are contributing to NATO at this point in Libya only. And of course, we know what's going on in Afghanistan. Right.
Well, this is the big debate. What is NATO's role going to be? The United States finds that feels that NATO is absolutely essential for operations such as in Afghanistan, whereas it's very questionable what it's doing in Libya right now, and it's more to support France and the UK in terms of trying to maintain its own oil supply. It's not as strategically important to us as to the U.S. as let's say Syria or Afghanistan is right now, or Pakistan. But NATO is still a mission trying to find its is an organization trying to find its mission in a post-Cold War era, and it's upsetting the Russians, it's upsetting the Chinese. Because the question is what is NATO going to be doing, and how are we going to continue maintaining it? Frankly, NATO is the United States is supporting NATO to a much larger degree than the other countries, and when the other countries start squabbling among themselves and pull out, as a number of countries have in this Libyan operation, it really shows a disintegration of the intent of NATO and its future.
Dr. Ziad al-Hafez, would like to have your input on this also, especially when it comes to the Arab Spring. I mean, when we look at what the United States uses, it uses UN and NATO as, NATO being the armed of the UN, the armed stretch of the UN, exercising on the ground when it comes to, under this quote, R2P, saving civilian lives. And that's how they want to contribute, as they say, to the Arab Spring.
Well, as I said, the view is totally different here. We cannot view NATO as an extension of UN. Actually, it's only an extension maybe of the State Department of the United States. And we have seen the limitations of NATO in Kosovo and its total irrelevance in Afghanistan and its tragic ineptness over Libya. And that's the whole problem. And Mr. Gates is quite right to really ponder about the future of NATO. Now, notwithstanding the fact that Europe is maybe facing one of the most severe crises in its future, as that crisis in Greece is threatening to spill over and to create an implosion of the European Union, and that will have direct effects on NATO itself. So at the end of the day, NATO is more of a liability than a strategic asset to the United States. That was also the fact that there are other poles of interest that are growing in the world. Russia, for instance, Russian diplomacy over the Libyan crisis has been the monkey wrench in the whole machinery. And the only thing that NATO can look really forward to is to find a face-saving political solution that would allow its exit and solve the problem of bloodshed in the country. At the end of the day, it's the Libyans who are going to determine their fate, and not NATO or anyone else.
Right. Lizzie Phelan, when will that happen? I think I asked this question from somebody here, but when is NATO going to be ready to face the fact, as our guest said there, that there has to be a political solution? We know that many officials in the United States have said about Afghanistan that there's got to be a political solution. About any war, really, they have conceded to that. So why is it that this is continuing in Libya?
Well, I think I have no faith in NATO to ever, have the humility to suggest that what is needed and what was needed from the outset was a political solution. It's clear that NATO have no way at the moment to get out. They've gone into this war and they can't lose face now. But I just quickly want to mention something before I come back to the point that hasn't been mentioned and that rarely gets mentioned, is that the sanctions also imposed on Libya have led now to a crisis in the country whereby people are having to queue for 6 days for food and fuel. And we have seen the impact on that in Iraq. It's really one of the greatest killers, actually, sanctions, sometimes more so than outright military warfare. It killed millions of people in Iraq. But coming back to the NATO being an extension, the UN being an extension of NATO, sorry, you said the other way around. I would say that actually the UN has often been acting as an extension of NATO, and it has done so in Libya. And I have no faith in the
NATO
United
being
Nations.
an armed wing of the UN, in which the UN is used.
Right.
And then, of course, then NATO comes in, and of course, then we see how that gets exercised when it comes to various countries.
Right. Well, I'd say it the other way around. I'd say the UN is essentially a wing of NATO in the sense that it gives legitimacy to what NATO's agenda is. And I have no faith in either of these institutions to deliver any kind of political solution in the country. The United Nations has proved itself a failure since ultimately the war on terror, and even before then, it's not a democratic
I'm going to bring in Michael Maloof for the
institution.
last words. I'm sorry to cut you there, Lizzie Phelan. Michael Maloof, this war, there's a lot riding on it. If it fails, what would that mean for NATO, the United States, and its coalition partners?
Well, I think it's going to just continue down the path of irrelevancy in terms of trying to come up with any solutions. The countries that belong to NATO are not being attacked, and to go in and fight the way that they are, and bombing and indiscriminately killing innocent people, I think is going to diminish NATO and what its entire purpose is, and it's going to throw into very serious doubt what its future is going to be.
Okay.
And I think that NATO needs to be used very sparingly, and it has been used for years as an extension of the UN. And that's just one of the, because of many of the, of course, members of NATO are part of the UN, et cetera.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael Maloof, former Pentagon officer there from Washington. We appreciate your statements. From Beirut, we had Dr. Ziad al-Hafez, Secretary General of the Arab Nationalist Forum. Thank you. And of course, Lizzie Phelan, a journalist from London. It was a pleasure to have you. And of course, you, the viewer, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, Kaveh Taghvai, and the entire team here in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.